Thank you so much, praise team. Our current home we bought a little over 4 years ago, and it was built back in 1961. And so when you get an older home, especially when you first moved into it, if there hasn't been any upgrades that have occurred, there's probably some stuff that you're going to need to tend to, and such was the case when we first moved there. And so out of the gate, there were some things that we dealt with, but then a whole slew of stuff, excuse me, that you just think to yourself, we'll get to that eventually. And one of those things I finally got to, and it was when you come into the house from the garage, just over to the left, there's just a little small half bathroom. In that half bath, there was a wall sink, and it went in 1961. So it's made out of cast iron. It's got white enamel finish, but the finish was essentially gone. It looked terrible. I hate it. If somebody ever came over, I mean, it's one of those things, do I even want to wash my hands in this? It looked so bad. It looked like something you would gut fish in, is what it looked like. Maybe like at a pier or something. And so for 4 years, I keep saying, I need to change this thing out, And so finally, a week ago this past Friday, I told Caroline, I'm going to change this thing out. I go to Home Depot, and I get everything that I know that I'm going to need. I buy the wall sink itself. I buy a faucet, buy the new P-trap, all that stuff, new supply lines going to it. I get everything that I can possibly conceive of that I am going to need. I come back home, and it's time to start working. And the first thing that I need to do is just underneath the sink, turn the cutoffs off. Because to do this, I need to have no water going to it. I don't know how long it had been since those cutoffs had been turned, but as I go to turn it, the handle breaks off of it. All right, so now I've got to go back to Home Depot because I need to buy new cutoffs. When I get over to Home Depot, I'm talking to the guy who originally helped me, and he said, you know, honestly, you can save some money and just buy replace the guts of that cutoff, and it may take you a few minutes longer, but it's less than half the price. I said, okay. I buy those. I go back home. At this point, I've got to turn the water off to the house to be able to do this, so I make sure I tell everybody you can't, no toilet flushing, no hand washing, as if our boys wash their hands anyway. And so, anyway, make sure that I can then work on it. And I work and work and work. I can't get the guts of this cut off out. So I realized I'm just going to have to change them. It's so corroded, I can't get this piece out. So now I go back to Home Depot 3 times. And at this point, I buy cutoffs. I come back. I have to put them on. And so finally, after the better part of 3 hours and 3 trips to Home Depot, I'm finally able to actually begin what I was intending to do in the first place. So I get the sink hung on the wall. I get the faucet attached to the sink. Now I need to connect water lines, supply lines to the faucet. Well, it turns out I bought the wrong size. So I go back to Home Depot. And let's be honest, Caroline is less than thrilled with me at this point. And so I'm just trying to, just in the shadows, get this thing done. And so I go back to Home Depot, and at this point, I buy multiple sizes of cutoffs, just in case. I bought an electronic fireplace, just in case. I mean, at this point, I'm just tired of going to Home Depot. And so I get back home, and I connect the water lines. I haven't turned them on yet, but I connect those. And so the last thing that I need to do is the drain line, the P-trap and all that. And so I bought the little kit that has all that. And so I attach it going into the wall, coming out. And then I lack about this much pipe from being able to connect the bottom of the sink to the drain line. My 5th trip to Home Depot. At this point, I'm kind of ready for a 5th. And so... But this thing that should have been a fairly easy thing has taken me well now into the evening. But finally, I got it done. And honestly, it felt like at any point that there was conceivably a challenge I was going to experience. And the whole thing, it felt like it was just a comedy of errors. That being said, there were some takeaways. Some things that I learned or was at least reminded of. One of them is that any plumbing job is going to take markedly longer than you ever thought. Any plumbing job that you do is going to be markedly more complicated than you ever expected. And any plumbing trip is going to take exponentially more trips to Home Depot than you ever could have dreamed. So it was this whole comedy of errors, but at least there were some takeaways. This morning, as we continue our walk through the life of Samson, we're going to see a varied number of bungled decisions and choices that he makes that could perhaps best be described as a comedy of errors. Thankfully, they are recorded for us because sincerely there are some takeaways from this. Not simply so that we can say, oh, that happened, but we can say, that happened, and I need to make sure that I do not follow in those same footsteps. So what's going on? What are the takeaways? Look with me in your Bibles today to Judges chapter 14. Judges chapter 14. We dealt with the first few verses of this last week. But let me just set the stage for you so that we're all on the same boat. Samson is a miracle child. His parents had never had children. His mother was barren, and God sent an angel to share with them that they were going to have miraculously this little boy that was going to grow up, and God had significant plans for him. The totality of his life was to be dedicated, set apart, and consecrated to the service of God. In fact, there would be even visible ways in which that could be demonstrated, because he would be a lifelong Nazirite, which meant, among other things, he was not to touch anything unclean. He was not to have anything to do with alcohol, and his hair was to never be cut. And so even visibly, if you knew nothing else about Samson, if you were a part of the people of God at that point, you would say, hey, this is a guy that God has plans for. This is somebody that God has claimed the totality of his life. That being said, with all of that miraculous stuff in the background, you would think that his parents would be very much trying to shepherd Samson's heart and life so that he walks with the Lord completely all the days of his life. But last week we saw how Samson goes to a neighboring Philistine town, and he is attracted to some young, beautiful Philistine. This young lady that does not know God, does not walk with God, and in spite of that, though, he is intensely attracted to her and goes to his parents essentially to say, hey, I need you to make this happen. I need you to negotiate this so that she can become my wife. They offer some nominal protest, essentially based on ethnicity and cultural reservations, not because this is a woman that doesn't know God, not because this is a woman that may take you further from God, not because this is a woman that doesn't share your most fundamental convictions, but she's essentially just not one of us. So after their nominal protest has been cast aside, that leads us to what we're going to read today, beginning in chapter 14. That they need to go and meet this girl. They need to go from where they are to her town to have some introductory conversation. And so in verse 5, we're told that Samson went down to Timnah with his father and mother, and he came to the vineyards of Timnah. Now, it seems that at some point in this, I don't know exactly, the text doesn't tell us how, but somehow, some way, he gets separated from his parents, or there is space so that they don't see exactly what is getting ready to occur. As the second half of verse 5 informs us, that suddenly a young lion came roaring at him. That's Samson. Verse 6, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully on him, and he tore the lion apart with his bare hands, as he might have torn a young goat. And so literally with his bare hands, God empowers Samson with the ability to not only kill this animal, but literally tear it limb from limb. As the verse continues, it says that he did not tell his father or mother what he had done. So wherever they are, they're oblivious to what has just transpired. They get to where this prospective bride is in verse 7. He went and spoke to the woman because she seemed right to Samson. You know, the heart wants what it wants. In spite of truth, in spite of God's boundaries, he's just following his heart, or in this case, probably more accurately, his eyes. Verse 8, after some time, when he returned to marry her, so this initial conversation has taken place effectively where the dowry is going to be negotiated. A wedding date would be picked at some point in the future, and then so there's a wedding, and then there's going to be this massive celebration that is to occur. So Samson returned to marry her, and as he's passing where the lion had been killed, he left the road to see the lion's carcass, and there was a swarm of bees with honey in the carcass. So Samson does what you and I would do. If you find a dead animal, you look inside, right? He finds that there is a honeycomb. Verse 9, he scooped some honey into his hands and ate it as he went along. He comes to his father and mother, and he actually gives them some of the honey, and they eat. But we're told he did not tell them that he had scooped the honey from the lion's carcass. Verse 10, his father and mother went to visit the woman, and Samson prepared a feast there, as young men were accustomed to do. The word that's translated feast there in Hebrew is a word that actually refers to a 7-day drinking party, essentially, is what's going on. And what's Samson's position with alcohol as a Nazirite? Completely out of bounds. But that's what's going on. This is where Samson is. This is what he is connected with. Verse 11, when the Philistines saw him, they brought 30 men to accompany him. So we don't know how long this feast, this drinking party has been going on now in celebration of the wedding. Verse 12, Samson, in an act of seeming bravado, maybe because he is inebriated, he says to these Philistines, hey guys, let me tell you a riddle. If you can explain it to me during the 7 days of the feast and figure it out, I will give you 30 linen garments and 30 changes of clothes. So he dares them. Hey, I'm going to give you a riddle. If you can figure it out, 30 changes of clothes. You think about that today. If you had to go out and buy 30 changes of clothes, even at the cheapest of places, that's a chunk of change that you would spend. But you back it up to this point in history, clothes were not inexpensive to come by. And so a challenge such as this represented a fairly significant, in fact, maybe egregiously large wager. And so, verse 13, he says, but if you can't explain it to me, you must give me 30 linen garments and 30 changes of clothes. So Samson's thinking, I'm going to be set for life. 30 changes of clothes? So they say, okay, tell us your riddle. Verse 14, he says, out of the eater came something to eat. Out of the strong came something sweet. Now, based on what we just read, you know what he's talking about. The eater is the lion. Out of the lion came something sweet. That was honey. But 3 days passed, and they were unable to explain the riddle. On the fourth day, they go to Samson's wife. So the wedding has actually occurred. This celebration is continuing. And they say, persuade your husband to explain the riddle to us, or we will burn you and your father's family to death. Did you invite us here to rob us? So we need you to tighten the screws on him. We can't afford to lose this. Verse 16, so Samson's wife came to him weeping and said, you hate me, and you don't love me. You told my people the riddle, but haven't explained it to me. Look, he said, I haven't even explained it to my father and mother, so why should I explain it to you? Verse 17, she wept the whole 7 days of the feast, and at last on the seventh day, he explained it to her because she had nagged him so much. He's just had it. And you got to think at this point, it's day 7, what else can happen? But before the day is over, we're told she explained it to her people, and it was on the 7th day before sunset, the men of the city came to him and they said, what is sweeter than honey? What is stronger than a lion? So he knows he's been had. So he said to them, let me just go ahead and tell you guys, do not reference your wife this way. If you hadn't plowed with my young cow, you wouldn't know my riddle now. So he's saying, she told you. She told you. Verse 19, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully on him, and he went down to Ashkelon. It's another Philistine village. He killed 30 of their men, stripped them of their clothes, and gave their clothes to those who had explained the riddle. He's so furious, we're told, that in a rage, Samson returned to his father's house, and his wife was given to one of the men who had accompanied him. He's so mad, he's married, but he just walks away. And his new bride, his new wife, she just becomes the wife of someone who attended the wedding. This is a comedy of errors, a relentless stream of tragedy. And after turn, crazy stuff is happening. Now, it's beneficial to just know that this occurred. But God does not afford us this record simply so we can say, that's interesting. Didn't know that. That's kind of unusual details. Note to self, don't refer to your wife as a young cow. He wants us to learn what happened, but then learn from what happened so that there's some takeaways that have an impact on our own walks with the Lord. And so based on that, what are the takeaways? Let me give you just a few this morning from this passage. The first is this: God's ability is not yours. God's ability is not yours. It's His ability, and you've got to consistently to be able to distinguish between the two. Twice in this passage, first in verse 6, you see the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully on Samson. Over in verse 19, you see again, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully again on Samson. And so 2 times, first with the lion and then with these 30 Philistines, the power of the Lord comes upon Samson so that he is physically empowered. That at this point, he has physical strength that is effectively superhuman. It is supernatural. It is not Samson's ordinary physical ability. On his own, he did not have the ability literally to rip a lion into shreds. On his own, he could not take on 30 different men. But he's able to at this point because of the power of God. And what is occurring, though, is that Samson becomes a vehicle for God's power and God's ability. But one of the challenges seems to be for Samson is this. He lacks the ability, at least going forward, to apparently distinguish between what is his ability and what is God's ability. So he was there, he had a front row seat, his arms, his hands were involved, and so Samson begins, it seems to think, hey, look at what I can do. In terms of takeaway, this should have application for us as well. I hope you realize that God did not save you, begin a relationship with you, and have plans and purposes for you that just include sitting on a shelf and looking nice. God wants to use you. He wants you to be. He wants me to be. He wants our church to be. He wants our families to be vehicles through whom He can work. Sometimes those are in overt ministry settings, whether it's leading a Bible study, whether it is leading a small group, whether it is some mission project or mission trip, things that are overtly Christian, overtly church-related. But God also wants to use us in our workplace. He wants to use us in our classrooms. He wants to use us in our homes and in our dens and in our neighborhoods. God wants to use the totality of our days. And as we yield ourselves to Him and make ourselves available, He begins to work through us. He touches people through us. He impacts other people. He draws other people into relationship through us. In a varied number of ways. And hopefully, the longer that you have walked with the Lord, the more that you can look back in the rearview mirror and you can say, you know, I'm just grateful. And I can see God has used me in this varied number of different ways and opportunities. I'm sure there were probably more that He wanted to use me in that I kind of put up a no trespassing sign. But even then, I can see all these different ways in which God used me. The challenge, though, is this. As God begins to use us, as He works through us, it becomes pretty evident that we're experiencing some measure of success. People are being reached. Truth is being communicated. Circumstances are being affected by our participation in this. And initially it's easy to say, you know what, look at what God's doing. You know, if, for example, you begin leading a Bible study class, whether it's a Sunday school or a small group, if you begin doing that and people are coming up to you and say, man, I've learned so much about this. This has really affected my walk with the Lord. Thank you for this. Initially, it's easy to think, and initially it's easy to see, man, I'm just so grateful that God used me in this way. I'm not the sharpest pencil in the pack, but I'm just grateful that He was able to use me. But the more that you experience measures of or demonstrations of what appears to be success, bit by bit, over time, it begins to accumulate in your mind so that the distinction between what you can do and what God is doing gets blurred. And it doesn't happen intentionally, but very subtly, you get to the point where you start thinking, look at what I can do. Look at what I have done. Look at all these things that I have checked off the list. Look at all these wins that I have experienced. Candidly, this is particularly, I believe, a vulnerable temptation for those that are involved in vocational ministry because we are in the limelight regularly, having to do things in front of others. And as other people are impacted, as people begin to say, hey, this was a win for me, this had an effect on me, thank you for this. Very easily over time, what I can do and what God is doing, those distinctions can get blurred so that I can begin to think, look at me, I've got this, I can do this. I believe sincerely that what's going on in Samson's life is that God is working through him. He is a vehicle for God's power and God's ability, but Samson is, even here, I think early on, beginning to lose and blur the distinction between what he can do and what God can do. Let me just remind you what it is that you and I are bringing to the table, because Jesus told us this. He said, I am the vine, you are the branches. He that abides in me and I in him, the same brings forth much fruit, for apart from me you can do nothing. Do you know what Michael brings to the table? Nothing. Do you know what you bring to the table? Nothing. As God begins to use you, as God works through you, you have to be mindful and you have to be vigilant. Hey, this is not me. This is not my ability. I'm just plain grateful that God is choosing to use me. But I'm paying attention to, hey, this is not me. This is Him. It's hard to believe that already almost 9 years have passed since I came here to Gate City. And for 9.5 years, pastored in Charlotte, had a wonderful group of people that I loved and that loved me, that I was able to serve there. But while I was there, they started a senior adult choir. And God bless them, because they were willing to give of their time to practice and to learn and to be part of a worship service occasionally, and even occasionally do a musical. But I'm just going to be honest with you, they were terrible. Terrible. Anyway, when it came time for musicals, because one of the regular sound guys was in that group, they would have me run sound for them. And those of you who have ever messed with choir stuff or with soundboard stuff may be aware of this. If you're using track music, recorded music, most of those tracks come so that you've got the instrument portion, but then there's also a portion, and you can turn them up or down or completely off. There are voices as well, so that you can listen to what that particular song sounds like with a full choir singing it, or you can take all the voices out and hear just the music. And so typically, I wasn't going there for their rehearsals and stuff until it became or got close to time to have a musical. And so then I would be there for those final rehearsals and then the dress rehearsals. And so I'm in the back getting some stuff set up, and they began to sing. And so you remember that Barney Fife sensitive microphone? Anyway, I was looking for one of those but could not find it. Anyway, what I'm doing as I am back there is that I thought, man, this is rough. This is rough. And so what I began to do was to turn them down a little bit and add some voices to it, so that then you could open your eyes. And so then when it came time for them to do the musical, you guys sounded so good. You guys, it was a great job. Thank you for doing that. And they're like, yeah, we rocked this, didn't we? We sounded good. But in the end, it wasn't fully their ability. And the people listening, it seems, could not distinguish between what was their ability and what was recorded. And so they got credit for what others had done. Sometimes in the pursuit of following the Lord, as He works through you, you will get credit for what God has done. And sometimes over time you can get to the point where you believe it. You think, man, I am something. Man, I do have this. Look at what I can do. Look at what I can teach. Look at what I can sing. Look at how I can do all of these things. Look at all these people that I have impacted. Man, I wish everybody else could be like me. Let Samson be an example of what not to do. Let Samson be someone that you don't simply learn about, but learn from, and be mindful, vigilant about this fact. God's ability is His ability, not yours. And just be plain grateful when His ability flows through you to impact someone else for time or eternity. God's ability is not yours, but we also see in this passage, I believe this: delayed consequences are not non-existent. Delayed consequences are not non-existent. What does that mean? Samson is a guy for whom God has big plans. He wants to use him in significant ways. In fact, going back to chapter 13, God had announced to his parents who were barren, who had never had a child, thought that that's going to completely bypass them. And an angel shows up to say, God has designed a plan and a purpose that involves you miraculously having this little boy, that I'm going to use the totality of his days. His life was to be one that was set apart. But unfortunately, even his parents didn't stand in the way fully of him marrying a pagan woman. Is that a big deal? Sure it is. We talked about this briefly, or not briefly, we talked about this at some length last week. That the marital relationship is this side of heaven the closest, most impactful, the most consequential relationship that we experience in life. And Samson is getting ready to join himself, to hitch his wagon to someone that is not headed in the same direction. Someone who does not know the Lord, someone who does not walk with the Lord. There are red flags going up everywhere, but does that stop Samson? No, it is not. Or it does not. Is this a colossal blunder? Absolutely. He is headed down the wrong path with his foot on the gas. But does something happen immediately? No. There was the episode with this carcass of the lion. God had erected some very clear boundaries for Samson, and so he is not only to not touch anything unclean, he's certainly not to ingest anything unclean. Once this lion is dead, it is unclean, and not only does he touch it, he eats from this. In fact, then he gains co-conspirators who wind up, as he shares this with his parents, eating with him as well. Is there immediate pushback from that? No. And so the story continues. There is this celebration around the wedding that involves this 7-day drinking period. Is that out of bounds for Samson? Absolutely it is. But what is he doing? He's in the middle of it, making significant wagers as part of it. Should he be making a wager like this? Absolutely he should not. But is there immediate pushback? No, there is not. It seemed that what is going on in Samson's life is that he's making bad choice after bad choice, and because bad things do not immediately happen because of his bad choices, he believes that he can operate with impunity. Bad consequences, judgment, that's fake news. That doesn't come my way. I don't experience that kind of stuff. But the takeaway is this. Just because consequences of bad, out of bounds, ungodly decisions are not immediate does not mean that they are non-existent. Paul communicates it this way over in the New Testament, that you and I reap what? What is that we sow? And think about this. When you sow a seed, how long is a harvest experienced immediately? No, that there is time that passes from the sowing of this seed to the reaping of the harvest. So too it consistently is with our decisions, whether they be good or bad, that the consequences of those decisions do not, by and large, occur immediately. And because, unfortunately, too many times we don't get immediate pushback from bad decisions, we think, well, bad stuff just won't happen to me. But some bad stuff was going to happen to Samson. In fact, even in this passage, you begin to see things unravel. Final takeaway I'd give you is this. Choices beget similar choices. Choices beget similar choices. There is a cliche that tells us that birds of a feather flock together. And that cliche is used to communicate that people tend to associate with those that they think to be most like them. Birds of a feather flock together. I believe that's not only true as it relates to human relationships and interactions with others, but I believe it's also true as it relates to decisions. That good decisions, godly decisions, tend to spawn more good and godly decisions. Out of bounds, ungodly, across the line, sinful decisions tend to beget and spawn other bad decisions. In fact, I believe you see it in this passage. Samson makes a series of bungled, godless, and foolish decisions. He chooses wrong about a spouse. He chooses wrong about a lion. He chooses wrong about food. He chooses wrong about alcohol. He chooses wrong about wagering. Why does that happen? I think, again, it is because choices beget similar choices. Let me give you an example. It's likely, especially among those of you who are adults, that at some point along the way, in fact, maybe even multiplied occasions, you have sought to go on a diet, right? And so I have played that game. In fact, I need to play that game again, but you know how that tends to work. But in all likelihood, you have probably experienced something similar to me in this sense. I can think of, for example, once I've made this decision, I need to lose some weight. I can think of some seasons of time where I was doing really, really good. I was making some really good choices at most of my meals, and if I went over on one, I'd kind of make up for it on another. But I would, for this season of time, and sometimes a lengthy season of time, be on a good path. But one of the ways that I would stay on a good path is this. I'd be finding myself with an opportunity to eat something or eat somewhere or have a meal that is just like crazy. I don't know, like going to Golden Corral, or somebody hands you a plate of fudge or something like that. And I'll think to myself, I would really like that. I'm sure that tastes good. There's absolutely a part of me that would enjoy that. But I've been making so many good decisions for days on end, for weeks on end, for months on end. It's just not worth it. I'm not going to sacrifice all of that for this. And so I say, no thank you. But then there are other seasons of time that look kind of like now, where I'm just eating kind of whatever I want to. And so at that point, I go to a restaurant, I sit down, and I see, all right, so there's the fried chicken and the mashed potatoes. There is the grilled chicken with, and I don't know, and some of you like these salads that, I like the non-beneficial iceberg lettuce. That's good lettuce. Some of you eating those yard leaves that look like they're just raked up. I don't know what that stuff, that's terrible. But I'll see on a menu that there'll be this garden salad on top of yard leaves with some sort of light vinaigrette. And in my mind, I'll know that's 1/3 of the calories and 1/10 of the fat. That would be so much better for me. And then there's the fried chicken, mashed potatoes. Well, and I had donuts for breakfast. What's fried chicken for lunch? In that case, bad decisions beget bad decisions. Consistently, in the example and the experience of dieting, you can say, you know what, I can see that. That has absolutely happened with me. But I believe that carries over to far more things than just what it is that we eat. Samson has been on a path where he's been making bad decision after bad decision. There's not immediate pushback. He thinks it's not going to cost me. And, if I showed no restraint then, it's no fun to show restraint now. If I didn't deny myself then, why should I deny myself now? And so he's on this path where he is making bad decision after bad decision after bad decision, and it is going to catch up in a big time and in a bad way. Samson serves for us in this passage as giving us the record of a real comedy of errors, one bungled decision after another. We can learn about it, which is good. We can learn from it, which is markedly better. Let Samson's path be one that you pay attention to, but not one that you go down, deciding, you know what, I'm going to make sure that in my life, right now, even ways in which that God is using me, I'm paying attention to what it is that I'm bringing to the table, which is nothing. And that if anything of consequence is going on, it's because He is at work in me. I'm going to make sure that I pay attention to what God has said, because He judges, and bad decisions bring bad consequences. It puts me on the business end of God's discipline. I don't want that. And so even though there may be some delay between the choice and the response, I'm going to keep it between the lines, realizing that, among other things, the more that I do that, I'm establishing a trend that will make it more likely, if I obey Him today, that I'll obey Him tomorrow, the day after that, the week after that, the month after that, the year after that. Learn about Him, but more importantly, from His example, will you learn from Him? Will you bow your heads with me? Where all of this intersects your life and your circumstance, I can't begin to even pretend to know. But it's entirely possible, if not in fact likely, that there have been some things, or at least a thing, that God has used during our time together this morning to just draw some crosshairs on your heart and say, that's right on target with where you are. And maybe it is that your head has gotten a little big, because the distinction between what God is doing and what you bring to the table, it didn't happen intentionally. You didn't set out to do this, but those lines got blurred. You began to believe what it was that people were saying, forgetting what Jesus said when He communicated that apart from Him, I can, you can, we can do nothing. And maybe what God is saying to you this morning is that you need to kind of come back to square one. That you need to give credit where credit is due, and decide that going forward, that's how it's going to operate. Maybe it is this morning that yours is a life that is not barreling towards, but your choices are those that are barreling away from God. You don't need me, you don't need anybody else even to tell you that you're making some choices that God is not honored by, that He is not pleased by, that are not making you closer to Him, but are putting you more squarely on the business end, ultimately, of His discipline. And God is helping you to see before that comes, it is time to change. Just because consequences have yet to be experienced does not mean that they will not be borne. Maybe it is that God is showing you that you need to start a new path, a new normal, one that is characterized not by doing things just however, but to start doing things His way, deciding today to do that. Because it'll make it easier tomorrow. It'll make it easier on Tuesday. It'll make it easier on Wednesday. That God is leading you to start a new trend. Maybe God's showing you today that you need to begin a relationship with Him. In just a moment, we're going to have a time of invitation where however it is that God is guiding you, whatever it is that He's showing you that you need to do, you can make a decision during this time. Maybe you want somebody to pray with you. Maybe it is that you would like to find out or begin a conversation to get some more information so that what you realize others have in terms of a relationship with Christ, you would like to experience. Maybe today's the day to formally begin a relationship with Gate City. And God's showing you that. I can't, again, pretend to know what He's saying, but I believe that He's speaking. And as He speaks, He calls for a response. What's yours going to be today? Father, for giving us this record, we're thankful. And I pray, Lord, that we are not simply hearers of the Word, but we are learners from it, and because of that, we become doers. That you speaking through your Word today has an impact on what it is that how it is that even we view ourselves, what it is that we're going to do today, how it is that we're going to operate this week. Specific decisions that you're calling us to make, Lord, for your pleasure and for our ultimate good, I pray that we will make them. We commit this time of decision to you in Jesus' name. Amen. I'm going to ask if you would to stand and pray.